tonight I'm going to talk about calligraphy tools, what I regard as some of the basic must-haves, some of the don't-dos. It is very, very easy to spend money with Scribal. Insanely easy to spend money with Scribal. So where do I spend my money? I spend my money on my paper, whether it's, or my substrate, whether it's my vellum, my pergaminato, or my hot press watercolor paper. If your paper is rubbish, your work is rubbish. If I'm using gold and I wish to use 24 karat gold or a high quality gold, I'm going to buy a high quality gold. Cheap gold looks cheap. My third thing where I spend money is high quality paint. The better your paint, the better your experience. The more likely you are to keep working, the less frustrated you will be. The fourth thing that I spend money on is, or are, lights. If I can't see what I'm doing, or my lighting is bad, my eyes are going to get tired, my neck is going to get tired because I'm going to be sitting like this trying to see what I'm doing, and my colors are going to be off. So spend some money on lighting, and we'll look at that in a little more. And then the last thing is what I lovingly refer to as my goggles, which I didn't actually bring over here. These glasses are glasses that I have had made. They're prescription glasses, but the bifocal portion is bumped up to give me a little more eye support, visual support. I have some Optivisor type things, but if my eyes are getting tired, then my whole body just gets tired. So those are the 5 things I spend money on. What you're not seeing there is things like paintbrushes and pencils and doohickey toys and fancy stuff, right? Those are the 5 things that I invest money on. What I'm working on, the gold, the things that glow or glisten, the paint, how I can see my work, both from a light point of view and from a glasses point of view, or goggles, or an Optivisor, or a magnifier, you know, whatever your chosen tool is. So what do you need to buy as a new scribe? As little as possible until you have tried it. Buying art supplies is a lot like getting a spouse or a partner. It is highly, highly subjective. I will tell you that speedball nibs were developed in hell and are the child of Satan. And other people will absolutely throw me to the ground and say not true, right? Just because I don't like speedball doesn't mean that you won't like speedball. So ask around, speak to your scribal people in your barony, in your kingdom, in your shire. See if they have some scribal kits. A lot of the kingdoms will have some supplies in a little starter pack. Speak to people and say, you know, do you have any nibs that you really hate that I can try? And if those people aren't in the same town with you, then, you know, offer to pay something towards the item, but always pay the shipping. And I've traded stuff with people who were like, oh, no, you can just have it. I never want to see this again. I hated it. I'm like, I want to try it. Okay. And repurpose and upcycle. Don't think that everything you need to have needs to be brand new and the most expensive. Our heritage is a heritage of making do with less as scribal artists. So lean into that. Borrowing. If you have an event, see if you can find some other Scribal people going and say, hey, can I sit next to you and share your palette and just try your paints? And if you like them, now you have a direction. If you hate them, at least you haven't spent $300 buying schminky and you discovered that it was just god awful and you never want to see it again. Okay. So what to buy? As little as possible. We're very good here on Sunday night with the Scribes of a lot of us have a lot of stuff. And we are, in the main, quite happy to share it because either we hate it, and I'm quite happy for it to leave my house, or we're no longer using it, we've moved on, we've tried something else, and we've got it. It's not doing us any good sitting here. So always ask the question. And a very successful way of sharing paint is just to put some little squirts onto a Ziploc bag, let them dry, put some cardboard inside of it, put some cardboard on top of it, and pop it in the mail. And that's enough paint for most people to do an entire scroll. So it doesn't have to be large amounts of just extravagance and, here's a whole tube of schminky. I can send you and from that, you will know if it's something that you actually want to go and spend $20 a tube on. Good Scribal tools are expensive. Bad Scribal tools are more expensive because you may be spending $5 here and $3 there and $10 here. But let me tell you, at the end of time, you will have spent a lot more money than if you had gotten what you really liked in the first place. And you don't know what it is. The font of Scribal tools is the gift that keeps on giving. It is never ending. It's a bottomless pit. And even if we get a discounted John Neal of 5% when we buy from there, if you're spending $50 and you hate what you bought, that little 5% discount isn't really going to help you. So buy as little as possible, try as much as possible, and ask the question, hey, I'm looking for, has anybody used, can you share? And you'll be amazed at what you can share and have an opportunity to sit next to a scribe and build a little bit of a relationship as well as sharing some of their supplies. So don't be shy. The bulk of what we do as Scribal artists, and I'm leaning heavily into calligraphy here right now, is our nibs. And the first thing you have to decide as a calligrapher is, do you like springy nibs or stiff nibs? I'm a stiff nib girl. I'm a browser girl. You give me a Mitchell and I start losing my mind. There are very specific instances where I will willingly use a Mitchell, and the list is small. So the stiffer the nib, the crisper the lettering, most of the time, not always. If you're doing a lettering that's stiff, use a stiff nib. So if you want to get involved in Gothic and black letter and English hand, that kind of stuff, then go with a stiffer nib. If you want to be using humanist hands, Celtic letters, then you need a little more flexibility. Mitchell is the bendiest. The reservoirs on the Mitchells are horrendous. I far prefer to make my own little reservoirs out of jewelry wire. Those little clip-on reservoirs make the nib stiff, and that's not why you bought the Mitchell. If you're working on a slant board, a board that could be a piece of wood, could be a chopping board, could be an upside down baking sheet, I don't care, on a couple of books, 10 to 15 degrees is where you should be. And all of us should be working on a slant board because none of us want neck arthritis. You can use any of the nibs without a reservoir. So that's when your Mitchell really does shine. I talked about browser being the stiffest. Tape is a cheap version of a browser. It's a little softer. You don't get as good thins, but it's a middle of the road nib, speedball, middle of the road, Hino, middle of the road. There's a wonderful Japanese nib. I'm going to butcher the name, Kacha something or another, Kachawari, medium stiffness. So try all the nibs. John Neal has a sampler pack, and you can get a couple of nibs in different sizes. Again, ask people, do you have any nibs you don't want? I have some speedballs that are always looking for a home, and try them and find what you like. Once you have the nib you like, that's going to become your best friend. And the way the nib responds to your hand pressure, the angle of your hand, your grip, stuff like that, that's like a long-term relationship for life. It's wonderful. Once you've found the nibs you like, and people go, well, I can buy a nib for $1 or $2 each. They don't last forever. You will have to replace them or sharpen them. But even if you sharpen them, you still have to throw them away eventually. The number one thing is keep them clean. Wash them, rinse them. I have this little sonic cleaner that I spent, I think it was $30 on 20 years ago. One of my smartest Scribal investments. I put everything through my sonic cleaner, my nibs, my fountain pens, my parallel pens, little dishes like this that I've been, sometimes I mix ink or gouache, or I put gesso in them, gilding medium, they all go into my little sonic cleaner. And I'll put a little bit of ammonia, of dish soap, and then a whole lot of water. Once you take stuff out of your sonic cleaner, you take your nibs out of your sonic cleaner, dry them, rub some gum arabic into them as a protectorant, sharpen them if you need to, and then store them with some desiccant. Those little packets of stuff you get in your pills and your shoes, shoe boxes, put them in there. I keep all of my pens in sort of one of these roly-poly things, and I have little pockets of desiccant in the bottom of them. If you keep your pens in a box, lay them flat, throw some desiccant in there, and that'll help stop them rust. Once you have found a nib that's your best friend, it is your best friend for life in terms of that brand and the way that nib is cut. But take care of them, and they will last a good while. They don't last forever. So always make sure you've got some backups.
I'm basically only going to be in this as a calligrapher, not necessarily as any kind of illustrator.
Right.
So
perfect.
So
you are going to have to find the nib that makes you happy.
Yeah. Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. Because if you're going to sit down and you're going to have a long-term relationship with this thing, it needs to make you happy. Mm-hmm. And so I use my browser nibs 80% of the time. Mm-hmm. I have a very, very heavy hand, which is unfortunate. So I do all the tricks to lighten up my hand. And the browser, I can just about carve into paper with that sucker. And it stands up well to the way that I work. Mm-hmm. I like the reservoir, so I can work flat or on my slant board. And it's got a nice range of sizes. I can get all the way down to a 0.5 millimeter nib. So
where slant boards are concerned, how much of an outlay of cash should I expect?
Go to your kitchen, get your chopping board, put it on some books. You got a slant board.
All right. All right.
You know, I have a slant board. I have 3 slant boards. One of them I spent an obscene amount of money on, and it's my least favorite. One is a piece of gator board, and gator board is a little more expensive than foam core. Foam core you can buy at the dollar store. Gator board you can buy at Dick Blick or some of the art supply stores, and it's like foam core, but it's got a very thin layer of melamine on it. So it's hard. It doesn't buckle and bow, but it's not heavy like a piece of wood. So it's lightweight, and I can clip stuff to it. And I have multiple gator boards roaming around my house. And I'll put them on a book. I'll put a pile of books in front of me, or jam jars, or cans of bubbly, and put my board on top of it. I like to put a non-stick mat underneath them so it doesn't slide. Some people take a piece of wood, go to Home Depot, or get a piece of masonite. I don't care. Get something that's solid. You don't want something that's going to bow, that when you push on it, it gives. Take 3 books and make a stack out of them. Take a jigsaw puzzle board, you know. You just need something rigid. And you don't have to spend money on a slant board. You can, but don't.
Thank you.
Somebody had asked, how can you tell if a nib is like, you know, going bad or whatever, that needs to be replaced or sharpened?
One of 2 ways. Either it's digging into the paper and it's like, because the corners have gotten uneven. And so when you're doing, particularly on an upstroke, it'll like dig into the paper. It's not sliding on top of the paper. That's one measure of your nib needs some tender loving care. The other measure is you lose your thicks and thins. That suddenly it's like you're writing with a glorified crowbar. And you lose that differentiation between the real good thick and the real good thin. And your thins have become fatter and your thicks have become thinner. It's time for some nib love and care. And we'll talk about that in a little bit.
When you say it's hard to stroke up, I write very heavy-handed, and sometimes I find it hard to stroke up. So is it even more difficult?
Yeah, it just digs in. It's just like,
okay.
Yeah. It's just like, it's like you dragging this thing up the page instead of being able to slide. You should always be able to slide your nib. If your nib is digging in, if you're ending up with a lot of paper fibers, little balls on the end of your nib needs sharpening or honing. You know, it's one or the other.
And that's even the metal ones?
Oh, yeah. It's always the metal ones, right? Whether they're bronze, whether they're nickel, whether they're stainless steel, don't care. I treat them the same.
Okay.
They all need love. Even my parallel pens, I will take those to a honing stone quite happily, because they're also a steel nib. And parallel pens, you know, the angels invented parallel pens for practicing. They're not great for high quality work because you lose the thins sometimes. But from a practicing, from a doing certificates or name tags or bookmarks, that's all I use. I love my parallel pens, but they also need a little bit of maintenance, and you got to clean the thing really, really well. My sonic cleaner sees parallel pens all the time. Couple of things. This little chart here is just a reminder that at the end of the day, all of our nibs are measured in millimeters. So I don't care if you're working with an Osmo Gold, which is the most gorgeous nib. I have 2 sets and I love them to pieces. You're very, very hard to find now. Whether you're working with a Mitchell, so, you know, they'll call it a size 6. Speedball will call it a size 6. Browser will call it a 0.5 millimeter. You can always bring your measurements back to millimeters, and most of your online digital line generators are going to talk about millimeters. So this is one instance where you're going to have to sort of get into the decimal age and start thinking about your calligraphy is millimeters. Hillary put into chat talking about a slant board as a drawing board. Absolutely. There's a chain of stores. We've just opened one in Fargo called Five Below. They have some great drawing boards for $5. The Statler drawing board, I have one of them, it's not here, that has a built-in ruler that I like when I'm doing particularly certificate work. It seems to work well for me. I can actually put it on my lap and do that when I'm watching TV. So there's all sorts of things out there, but don't think you have to go and buy something with a built-in light box on a stand with drawers and everything. You don't need it. Just get something that works. Upturned cookie sheet. Take a cookie sheet, turn it over, boom, you're good. Right? Pointed pens. People say, well, you know, can we use pointed pens in the SCA? Absolutely. You're not going to do copperplate. That's not period. But you can use them to make wonderful lines by working with them sideways, or you can sharpen or bevel them, take them to a one of these 4-way nail buffer block things and take off the point and just file them down is what you're doing. And you're going to make a very, very fine nib, like 1/4 millimeter. That is wonderful for edging stuff, doing patterning, or doing teeny, teeny, tiny lettering.
A question about pointed pen. In the SCA time period, what scripts or hands would have been used with a pointed pen? Maybe italic or
early italic.
A lot of it is brush pen or brush writing, or like you said, pointed pen where it's off to a side like a copperplate pen.
Yeah. If you go back and you look at the work of somebody like Alighieri of 1400, early 1400s, early, even pre-Renaissance, that work, that pre-italic work, is what we would now do with a copperplate pen.
Okay.
Because it's easier for us to do it with a copperplate pen. They were doing them with brass tools that they honed, that were incredibly soft, so you could write maybe a page of writing and then you had to go get a new one. You can also cut a quill to act like a copperplate pen. It doesn't last very long, but you can get remarkable effects. And what you're really looking for is that gentle line swell, that bit of pressure is going to give you. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's always been a little point of contention, is pointed pen in the SCA time period. It's been a challenge.
because copper plate as a style of writing,
Right.
as a recognized script is out of period for us.
Right.
But that's not to say that just, landed out of the blue one day and suddenly we had copper plate. Everything came from somewhere.
Right. Okay.
And none of this happened overnight. They didn't have the internet and Instagram wasn't a thing. So news didn't travel around the world within 45 minutes. It took years, generations. You needed one artisan to travel from an area to a different area. And by, happenstance, you could share information.
Right. Okay.
So
Thank you.
it was all there. Tools were different, but it was all there. Nib sharpening. Patricia Lovett, who I'm a huge fan of. She is an English calligrapher. She works largely with the British Library. She has an OBE in Heritage Arts and Calligraphy from the Queen. She has an excellent YouTube video on nib sharpening, and her video is quite nice because she's drawing little diagrams as she's sharpening the nib. So for those of you that have access to YouTube, Patricia Lovett's YouTube video is one that I reference. The other one is John Stevens' written instructions, and I do have these, and if you remind me at the end of this, I'll put a copy of these into that directory I have up on Google Drive. And John Stevens is arguably one of the greatest modern calligraphers alive right now. And any of his work is phenomenal. And he's deeply invested in following tradition and honoring tradition. And he has this a hand sheet of notes that's freely available on the internet. It's probably 20, 25 years old that I've known about it, about how to shape or sharpen your nib. And if you can't find it, let me know. And at the end of this, if you remind me, I'll pop it out there. So that's the care and feeding of your nibs. Then your nibs go into something. And I really don't care what kind of holder you use. If you want to make them out of air clay, have at it. It's whatever works for you and your hand. If they are made of wood, as a lot of them are, I would recommend you dip carefully because you don't want to get the wood wet. And what I also do when I get a new wooden one is I take clear nail varnish and I nail varnish the bottom 1 inch because sometimes I don't dip as carefully as I should. And it just protects it for a little bit. The little inserts in the middle of it, if you are a wood turner and you want to turn your own pens, I will send you 10 of the inserts if you send me 1 pen. So I do have the inserts and I will trade with you. And you get different sizes for different uses. There is no such thing as a right pen. People will say you have to buy the Speedball yada yada, or you have to buy the Kamikaze something or another. And it truly isn't true. And this goes back to my adage of sidle up to people and say, hey, can I fondle your pen, please? And try people's pens.
Oh my God.
You get big ones, you get round ones, you get long ones. I've got pens where I'm using the little plastic grip things that kindergartners use on their pencils.
Yep.
Because
love those, especially
I
for
find those
heavy-handed.
they're just a whole lot more comfortable, right? Gaffer's tape. If you wrap that around the bottom of your pen, that gives you a really nice grip. Sometimes if I'm doing a lot of work in the morning, I'm going to use a thin pen. By the end of the day, I'm going to be using a fat holder. Some people say the bigger your pen holder, the better it is for fine work. Some people say you should always have cork at the end of your pen because it's a little squishy. I just use tape on the ends. I like acrylic holders because they don't rot out when I'm careless with them or put them in water like the wood does. But I do like really finely made, hand-turned fine wood pens as well. I can spend $1. I think the cheapest one at John Neal's like $1.85. Quite happy to spend that. And I can spend stupid amounts of money on a rare African wood that I discovered when I was in Africa the other day. You can buy titanium pens. You can spend hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars on a pen holder or $1.85. What is important is how does it sit in your hand? Do you like a long pen? Do you like a short pen? I like a shorter pen holder that's a little stubby. It's very, very personal. So borrow from everybody who has a pen holder that you've never seen before and say, hey, can I try that? And see how it sits in your hand. It should fit really nicely in your hand. It needs to feel like an extension of your hand. Lines for practicing. There are, in the document that's up there, I've given you a couple of them. Lanquage is the one that I probably use the most. The whole site is millimeters. That's why I gave you that millimeter chart. I like to print them on overhead transparency. And you can buy overhead transparencies on Amazon for inkjet printers. And if anybody wants to try it, let me know. I'll send you some sheets because I think I bought 100 sheets and I'm still wading through them. But I like putting them on overhead transparency. So if I'm layering stuff on my light box, I'm not getting opaque really, really. Make notes on them so you know what hand this sheet was made for. What's your proportions? You know, is it 1:1 ascenders or one pen nib with X height is 2, descenders are 1, you know, whatever it is, how many millimeters. Make sure that when you pick up a sheet, you know what it's for. People love graph paper. Thomas has slowly but surely turned me on to the Ames lettering guide, which is this little tool that I have owned one for 30 years, never understood it. And thanks to Sunday Night with the Scribes and Thomas, I finally understand it. And I love it, especially if I'm working on opaque papers or documents that I don't want to put on my light box because I don't want them exposed to heat long term, like vellum, like pergaminata, black papers, you know, anything thick. If you want to produce reliable lines, the Ames lettering guide is your friend. When it comes to ink, I have ink. My ink of choice is the Chinese stick ink with a stone. If you're going to clean your stone, well, not if, when you clean your stone. If you clean your stone, you always clean your stone. Don't use soap on it, else you're going to have bubbly letters for a very, very long time. Warm water, toothbrush, give it a good scrub, and let it dry. If your ink is too runny or it's not holding together properly, add a couple of drops of gum arabic. Gum arabic is one of those magic fluids that is used to hold the pigments together. And so it works well in ink. Beware using waterproof ink, especially in fountain pens and on your nibs. Some of them, especially the acrylics, if they dry, you may or may not be able to get it off the nib. And if it's in a fountain pen, kiss the fountain pen goodbye. Because it just dries to plastic. It's just a block of plastic. So I don't use waterproof inks. I reckon if somebody's going to take my work and run around in the rain with it, then they're going to have a very different artistic piece at the end of that. And I would rather produce high quality work than a more mediocre work, because the waterproof stuff, the acrylic stuff, just doesn't come off the pen or even off the brushes nicely. Your acrylic inks tend to be shiny. You can mix gouache into them if you want to dull them down from a painting point of view, even from a lettering point of view. But just watch out with them. When I buy ink, if I'm buying Chinese ink, Sumi ink is my second ink of choice. I get the green bottle with the black top. I will decant that into little bottles that I get from the dollar store. And you can get 6 of these little bottles for $1 or $1.25, and I love them to pieces. And I'll put them into the little bottle, and then I use this rather than the big bottle, and then the big bottle gets dust in it, and it evaporates, and the consistency goes off, and so just any ink, I just put in a little bottle, label it, and off I go. If you're using walnut ink, I've just made a whole big batch of walnut ink, and I've got a batch of oak gall ink in the slow cooker right now, and I love those. You need to keep them in the fridge to prevent molding. You can put some clove oil in, you can put some alcohol in, but they will go off, especially in the warmer climes. So just enjoy ink when it comes to practicing calligraphy. Keep an eye out on your buy nothing local sites, garage sales. You'll find all sorts of people giving away inks and stuff. And so I very seldom buy ink except my Sumi or my sticking. And I very seldom practice with black ink because boring. So I've got orange inks, and I've got glitter inks, and I've got all sorts of strange, weird inks that I'll practice with because I want some fun in my life, and practicing can be hard. Food coloring works well as an ink. Coffee and red wine work well as an ink. I use gouache and watercolor instead of inks. Don't think you have to buy super expensive inks. And again, try from people. Some people will tell you, the only black ink in the world is Noodler's Heart of Darkness.
Oh.
And I went and bought some, and I hated it with passion. It's just me, right? There's nothing wrong with the ink. It's just me. I don't like the way it works for me, for the way I work, for the materials that I use. I don't like how it looks when it dries. I don't like how it looks 2 weeks later. It's me. Whole lot of other people that are far more experienced SCA people than me will tell me I'm nuts. That's fine. Again, very, very personal choices you're making. And if you don't like an ink, don't use it. Give it to somebody else. And keep finding the ink that you do like. Because there's tons out there. Metallic inks have mica in them. They will be a mess. They have this mass. The mica sits to the bottom. I have a little thing that looks like a miniature version of a milk frother. That you can stir the things up. I use this for my gold inks, my P.H. Martin 23 karat copper plate ink is I didn't mean to kick that over. That's my favorite gold ink for writing with. And I will stir it up with that little thing because it doesn't put a whole lot of air and bubbles into it. So when you're mixing up gold inks, silver inks, stir them, don't shake them. Otherwise, you're going to have bubbles everywhere, and it's going to take forever for those bubbles to settle. And as you're lettering, your lettering is going to look like cheese, like Swiss cheese. It's going to have little holes in it from when all the bubbles pop. I keep separate brushes and nibs for when I'm working with golds and silvers, because that mica gets into the fibers, especially of the brushes, and you'll be trying to paint a pretty blue line, and all of a sudden there's gold coming through it because the gold goes up into the ferrule. So I have separate brushes and I have separate nibs for my metallic inks and paints versus my non-metallics. It's a little bit because I'm ADHD and I'm a little obsessed about cross-contamination like that. I also have cool golds and warm golds, both in paint and ink, because depending on my piece, if the colors are predominantly warm colors, yellows and reds, and nice warm colors that are coming towards you, I'm going to want to use a warm gold as opposed to, say, the Winsor Newton gold, which is like green gold and is just cold, right? So I do tend to collect golds, gold inks and gold paints. I have quite a collection because they are so variable. And if anybody says to me, hey, have you tried this gold? I'm like, no, because different batches come out differently too. So get yourself a little selection of golds, gold paints to play and practice with. So that brings us to the ever technical hot topic of what paint should I buy? And the first thing to talk about is it going to be watercolor or is it going to be gouache? When I lived in Africa, we did everything in gouache. If you mix up gouache and let it sit for long enough, the pigment molecules, which are slightly bigger in gouache than they are in watercolor, they will dissolve even further. And provided you start out with a high quality gouache, not one that has chalk in it, it'll act like watercolor. So if you're using ultramarine blue, which is transparent, if you're using gouache or watercolor, you can get the same effects. If you're using gouache, you just got to be more patient and set up your paints, let them sit for a little while, make sure they're wet and juicy, and then they will act like watercolor. So I use gouache almost exclusively. I have watercolor. I teach watercolor because it is a different look and feel when I want it to be a different look and feel. But, ultramarine blue is ultramarine blue. The only difference should be between gouache and watercolor for good brands is the grinding of the pigment size. It is not because it has chalk or whitener in it. That is not what makes gouache gouache. Gouache is gouache because the molecules are bigger. So when you put it down, it's a little thicker and it goes opaque. And that's what we like it for. That's the closest to what we have for medieval type paints and mediums. It should just be pigment, honey, and or gum arabic, possibly a little bit of glycerine, but not much more than that. So this is where you really, really want to try everybody else's paints and see what they have and see how you like it. I use M. Graham, which comes out of Oregon, and Schmincke, which comes out of Germany. Those are my go-tos. I like the company, I like the ethics, I like the way they make their products, I like the way they pay and treat their people. So I buy paint from a quality as well as what else does the company do point of view. There are a whole lot of people who will die on the hill of Winsor Newton, closely followed by the Haldane people. And there's a growing group of people who are supporting a range of paints called Arteza, which is a much cheaper range of paints that I believe you can only buy at Michael's. I may be wrong on that, but I think you can only buy them at Michael's.
You can buy them on Zoom, Amazon.
Or Amazon. There we go.
And they have a website that's pretty extensive with supplies.
They have a great website, a really, really nice website. And I had a bunch of questions for them, and I emailed them a whole long list of all of my technical paint type questions, and they responded. And I was just like, wow. So one of my students went and bought a whole lot of Arteza because it was cheaper for her to buy a set of 12 or 18 Arteza than it was for her to buy a tube of Winsor Newton white, and she just wanted white. And then she came to my house and gave me the box of Arteza, and I've been playing around with them, and they are not bad. Not bad. Their metallics don't touch, but the rest of them I'm really liking. So from a low cost point of view, Arteza certainly is a brand to look into. And I know Ellen uses it a lot as well, so you can check in with her. Metallic Arteza is horrid. I don't know why they screwed up their metallics so bad, but they have. Just avoid them.
You said this is for gouache.
They make watercolor as well. I have not played with their watercolor. I have only played with their gouache. So I have no experience with their watercolor. But I really like their gouache. Not all brands of paint can be squeezed into little containers and left to dry, which is your preferred method of working with paints. Haldane is one of them, that they just crack, crumble, and fall out. If you are going to use the little pans, which is what I use, and then I put them in a pallet, these days I'm actually taking a X-Acto knife and I'm scratching the inside of these little plastic wells because they are so well made now that they're completely smooth. So the paint has nothing to grip onto. So I scratch them up like you do the inside of a quill when you cut a quill. Scratch them up so the paint has something to grip onto, and that seems to make a bit of a difference. And then I put some gum arabic in there. When I talk about washing your palette, this is my palette. It's long overdue for a wash, right? Looks disgusting. I just put the whole thing underneath the kitchen tap and spray it down, and then just let everything pour off. Yes, I'm wasting paint, but it's a whole lot better than painting with mud.
Mm-hmm.
And before you start painting, spray your paints with some water. Get a little spray bottle and give them a good spritz. You don't have to wash them. You don't have to put them in a bath, right? But you do need to just get them wet so that the water starts activating the pigment and the pigment starts dissolving a little bit. And you'll have a much better painting experience than trying to scrape into dry paint. So if ever you want to start a bar fight at a calligraphy conference, tell them that Winsor Newton Series 7 brushes are terrible and should be burnt. Or that your brush from the dollar store is the best thing you've ever discovered. My number one criteria for a brush is a good point. And the way I find if a brush has a good point is I lick it.
Mhm.
And if it comes to a really good point, that for me is a good brush. I don't care if it's made from squirrel or lynx or mystery fur from the dark side of the moon. Don't care. It needs to come to a good point. Having said that, the best way to destroy a good point is to mix paint with it and take it and, grind it down. So that's where your dollar store cheapy brushes, all brushes that are old, come in. And these are my mixing brushes. These are my painting brushes. Good point, good brush. No point, mixing brush. Rinse your brushes well. Wet them before you start working with them. Give them a good 10 15 seconds in water, because the bristles come all the way up here and you want to make sure all of this is wet. Otherwise, the minute you put it in paint, it just sucks all your paint and puts it down here, and you just wasted paint. And that's why 3 days later you're painting with it and all of a sudden you've got a red streak coming in the middle of your blue paint and you're like, where'd that come from? It was sucked in down there. And then I have separate brushes for my metallics and I have separate brushes for my white, because once you get color in white, you're done. So that's my criteria on a brush. It's got to come to a good point. I don't spend a lot of money on brushes. I have Winsor Newton Series 7. I buy them when they go on sale. There are times when I really, really enjoy them, and there are times when I can throw them across the room. A Hillary brush is a thing of beauty. I like brushes that have long bristles as opposed to short bristles, because I like painting. I don't like dipping. Again, personal choice. Okay. So if you're going to spend money on brushes, make sure it's got a good point. If it's a $5 brush or a $50 brush, I don't care. Make sure it comes to a good point. Water. I live in a first world country and I use the water out the tap. The only time I get really emotional about water is if I am gilding something. I do like to use distilled water. We have a reverse osmosis thingamajig in our house. I'll use that water. The only time I get emotional about water is when your mixing water is dirty. If your mixing water is dirty, your paint colors are dirty. You're painting with mud. So you can't get nice, clean, clear colors if your mixing water looks like this. You're just painting with mud, right? So I like these little yogurt jars because they've got a flat bottom and I can't whack them across the room much. And I'll have 2, if not 3 of them with me. If you can't see the bottom of your water jar, you need to clean it. And I throw all my paint water goes on my plants, and then I rinse it and I refill it. Pencils, I use a 3mm retractable pencil. I used to use a B quite a lot. I'm now almost exclusively using 2 and 4Hs. From an eraser point of view, if you're going to work on black or dark colored paper, you need a black eraser. Otherwise, you get those white smudges, and that's not good eats. Clean your erasers. Just rub them on plain white copy paper. If you can't get your eraser clean, bin them. If you can't get your kneadable eraser clean, bin it. Otherwise, you're just going to smudge everything. You can get big fat erasers. You can get little tiny erasers. And the reason for that is you need little tiny erasers when you want to erase little tiny things. Don't take your big fat eraser and try and do that. It'll just make you crazy. And then I have the world's best little ladybug. And she is my vacuum cleaner. And I shall vacuum up all of that eraser junk all over my workspace. It's my one true extravagance. Little desktop vacuum cleaner. They're the best. Practice paper. Never practice on paper that's bleeding. The number one rule of practicing your calligraphy. If the paper is bleeding, bin the paper. You could try rubbing it with gum sanderac or pounce and seeing if that helps fill in the holes that are making all the bleeding. But I don't like starting out practice and being frustrated. So I am a little picky about it. I'm using a lot of the Strathmore drawing paper or marker paper or layout paper. And I don't mind spending a little bit of extra money on good practice paper, because then it's one less thing for me to worry about. Whenever you practice, date your work, throw it in your binder. Magnifiers I talked about earlier on. These are some really nice lightweight magnifiers that can go over your glasses. They're in my document. I also like working through a magnifier. I discovered this one that's a big ring light, and I can change the colors to cool and warm, which helps me when I'm doing toned work and stuff like that. So protect your eyes and make sure you can see stuff clearly and you're not squinting or you're bending over too much. Tape your work to a surface so it doesn't buckle. I like gatorboard. I like white gatorboard. I like a low tack tape. This is my favorite, which is the 3M delicate surface tape, but it's purple. So I don't like having my work surrounded in purple because it affects the colors and how I'm seeing my work. So I tape my work to the board with this, and then I come along with good old-fashioned cheap masking tape and put that over the top of it, or white tape. And then I get rid of the color impact. So I can have multiple projects on the go taped onto boards. And I have trays for each project that have what I'm using for that project. I have these metal trays. You can use a cookie sheet, you can use a shoebox, don't care. But when I go and pick up that project to work on it, I have everything I need in a box. I'm using a lot of these plastic meat trays from Aldi's right now. And they're great fun. And then keep notes of your projects. Everything I'm not using, I have a library of 12 by 12 storage boxes. So I have them all labeled. They all stand vertically on the shelves, and that's all my bookmaking supplies, painting supplies, you name it. It's all in 12 by 12 boxes, so that I can always find stuff. As a beginner, I used to spend an awful lot of time looking for stuff. So getting stuff organized some way, somehow. 12 by 12 storage boxes are my jam. Smaller boxes, maybe your jam. But having stuff organized that you can go somewhere for your ink, and you can go somewhere for your brushes, and you can go somewhere for your practice paper, instead of having to dig through cupboards and drawers. Really takes a lot of the frustration out of getting stuck into Scribal. A half cookie sheet, the bigger ones, I buy them at Costco. My board goes on them, my supplies go on them. I like them. Your most important Scribal tool, as we wrap this up, is you. You are your most important Scribal tool. If your body is hurting, if your posture is wrong, your Scribal is going to go to hell in a handbasket. So anytime you're doing calligraphy, we need both feet in the ground. You don't sit like a pretzel. Keep your tools on the side of your dominant hand so you're not reaching across your body all the time and whacking your stuff. Cover your work. In other words, protect your work. Anything you've finished with, I use those clear overhead sheets and I just tape them over the work so that if I do splash water or coffee or a glass of wine on them, I'm not going to lose the project. Take breaks. You really cannot work for hours on end. And if you're going to do a lot of lettering, don't do it on a lot of caffeine. So summary is buy one. Buy a good one. And I don't care what it is. A paintbrush, a set of nibs, a holder. You don't need hundreds of everything. Clean them, look after them, and they will last a long time. Work clean. Don't have everything in a huge mess. Clean your work area when you settle down. Take out your clean tools. When you're done, clean everything, pack it all away. Stay organized. Otherwise, you spend an awful lot of time trying to find stuff. And then you go and you buy more stuff. And the minute it arrives in your house, that's when you find the thing you'd lost, right? Store them, label them. Have a system, whether it's 2 shoe boxes or 3 12x12s or whatever floats your boat. I have little vertical shelves from IKEA that I'm quite passionate about. Whatever. But make sure you know where your stuff is. Otherwise, you're going to buy a lot of stuff you don't need. And then use what you have. Buying new stuff all the time just means you have more and more stuff that you're not using. And my core calligraphy world could probably fit into a photocopied paper box. Maybe half a box. Everything else I have, and let me tell you, there's a ton of it in this house, is stuff that I've bought or been given and I don't actually like, or it doesn't give me the pleasure, or it just doesn't work well for me. And I've got it if I need it kind of as something weird. But the stuff that I use, the stuff that gives me pleasure, it's not a whole lot of stuff. So buying lots, buying big stuff, don't. Take your time. And then just very selectively buy the bits and pieces that you need.